Um, my name is Carlos, and I am the content director at Change Lawyers. Change Lawyers is a foundation, and we invest in the next generation of legal change makers. And I'm really excited to be hosting this webinar today on this particular topic because it's something that's very close to me. But before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that we are truly living in extraordinary times. We're living in a pandemic within a pandemic. And yet, despite all of this, I do remain grateful. Grateful for everyone here in the room today, and grateful that we have created a space to talk about how us as people of color, Black people, Indigenous people, first generation people, queer people, how we can build and protect our power together. So with this in mind, I do want to acknowledge that this is going to be a very intentional space for the next hour. Change Lawyers, whenever we host these events, we truly value your honesty, we value your vulnerability, and we value your emotions. And above all else, we value your identities, whatever they may be. So as we begin to talk today, we're going to center the experiences of people of color and first generation people. And I'll ask all of you to feel free to share your stories in the chat box. Please go ahead and ask questions either in the chat box or in the Q&A box, because we've reserved some time at the end to answer as many as we can. And so with this in mind, I just want to give a quick introduction to some of the people that you're going to be hearing from today. You're going to be hearing from two of our Change Lawyers family. The first person is Ola Obiose. Ola is actually on the Change Lawyers Board of Directors. She is a third-year law student at Stanford and a second-year neuroscience PhD student, also at Stanford. She serves on a lot of different things, including as a co-president of the Black Law Students Association and an articles editor for both the Stanford Law Review and the Stanford Journal of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. And then the second person you're going to be hearing from is my boss, Chris Pinong-Bayan. He is the ED of Change Lawyers. And as many of you know in the room, Chris has had a deep and extensive experience in social justice issues. He profoundly believes in giving voice to the unheard and breaking down barriers. And prior to being at Change Lawyers, Chris was the executive director at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Asian Law Caucus. And he also held positions at Northern California Grantmakers, Positive Resource Center, and Filipino Advocates for Justice. But before we hear from Chris and Ola, I want to first give a big round of applause, virtual round of applause, to our presenter today. Angie is an attorney turned entrepreneur. She's a first-generation Asian American with over 5 years practicing intellectual property law before she became a career coach and a mentor to students, pre-law students, law students, and young lawyers. So with that introduction, I just want to hand it over to Angie. And Angie, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Carlos. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see all of you today. I am just blown away by everything that Change Lawyers is doing. When Carlos first talked to me about doing this webinar, I was just so excited because I really wanted to help other people that were like me, that were first generation, that might have felt like they were on the outside at some point, and they really wanted to be able to learn some strategies on how they could talk to people and network professionally and become more comfortable with it. And so, but just right up front, I just want to admit I'm not an introvert. So I talked to Carlos and I said, hey, I think it'd be really great if they could also hear from introverts as well as people who come from different backgrounds as me, so that we could get a really rich dialogue going. So we want today to be really interactive. We want you guys to, talk in the chat box, and we're going to be sharing our stories and how we are encountering these situations and how we've responded to these situations. And then we want to see if you guys agree, or if you have other strategies that you can use. We really want this to be a dialogue. So we don't want to talk at you today and just tell you you need to do these 3 things. We want you to talk and get involved in the dialogue and see if some of the things that we've done in the past have worked for you, and see if some of them don't work for you, and really, get an open and rich dialogue going. So with that, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. As Carlos said, I'm a first generation Asian American. So I am a Thai Texan. So my parents are from Thailand. I was born in Texas. And so I say y'all and yes, ma'am, and all those things that Texans say. But I started thinking about going to law school pretty late in the game. So I was already working in advertising, working for an ad agency, when I decided, that to go to law school. The recession hit, derailed all my plans in staying in advertising, and I thought, what am I going to do with my life? And I said, I'm interested in going to law school. I had no idea how to find out more about being a lawyer because my parents are engineers and we don't have any lawyers in my family, and I didn't know a single lawyer at the time. So I thought, what skills do I have that I could use to learn more about being a lawyer? And so I thought cold calling. I cold call for the ad agency all day. I'm not afraid of cold calling. I'm not afraid of people ignoring me or telling me no. So I decided to cold call over 50 lawyers in Dallas Fort Worth. So I literally took a telephone book, I flipped it open to lawyers, and I just started calling people to try to learn more about what being a lawyer was really all about. So after cold calling 50 people, I only got to connect with 3. And out of the 3, I ended up finding one lawyer who took an interest in me, and he became my mentor. And he was like, I'm so shocked that you would even cold call 50 lawyers. I think that's crazy. But I would love to help you learn more about being a lawyer. And so why don't you come work for me while you're applying to law school? And during that time, I will introduce you to other lawyers. So my boss was very active in the community. So he was part of the Dallas Bar Association. He was the chair of a section. He, was very, very involved, knew a lot of lawyers, and he wanted to help me network with other lawyers. So I remember him taking me to my very first CLE and networking event. And this was when I was still thinking about going to law school. And I was all of the ripe, bold age of 24, had no idea how to interact with lawyers. And I remember he drugged me to the CLE on regulatory law. And the first half of the CLE was just a presentation. The second half was a networking event. And I didn't know anything about regulatory law, so I'm looking around the room and I'm, tuning out the presentation, looking around to see who's there. And I am probably the youngest person in the room by about 2 decades. I think everyone was way older than me. And it was very clear that I was the only non-lawyer in the room. And I also was one of maybe 4 women in the room of probably 60 people or so. And I think I was the only woman of color. And so I started to feel pretty out of place. And I remember when we got to the networking part, I was ready to cut and run. I'm like, see you. I don't want any part of this. I just feel so uncomfortable and I'm ready to go. And my boss said, okay, why do you want to leave? And I said, I just feel like I don't belong. I don't have anything in common with any of the people in this room. And they all are looking at me like I don't belong here. And I feel really intimidated by talking to lawyers because I clearly don't know anything about regulatory law. And he said, that's totally fine. Those are all legitimate concerns, but I still want you to network. And so he dragged me around the room and he said, I want you to introduce yourself and say, hi, my name is Angie. I'm interested in going to law school and I'm trying to learn a little bit more about what being a lawyer is about. And I came here with John. I'm his legal assistant, and see what happens. And I said, okay. So I did that, ran around the room. He told me to just focus on getting a follow-up meeting with these people. You're not going to get to know any of these people super well while you're in the room. Just get a follow-up meeting with them. Take them out to lunch or coffee next week, whatever you can do. But you're not going to get to know anybody in depth at this event. And I said, okay. So ran around the room, said those things, and then decided to get as many meetings as I could. And while I was doing this, I started to notice something. So as I was introducing myself to people and saying the first part of my elevator pitch, you know, hi, my name is Angie, I'm interested in going to law school, people were just, they kind of tuned out. The moment that I said, oh, and I came here with John, they like lit up and the ice melted off their face and they all of a sudden became open to talking to me. And I thought, that's the hardest part. That is the hardest part about building relationships for first generation people like me, is we don't have somebody already willing to vouch for us most of the time. And building these relationships is a lot easier when you have somebody who's there who can vouch for you and help you open doors that were previously closed to you. And so I realized that that was the true key, is learning how to be able to do this for other people. And so eventually, after going to law school, practicing for a few years, and then really wanting to mentor a lot of other people and teach people the things that John taught me, I wanted to create a larger platform for that. So I created a mentoring program to help prospective law students like me who are trying to learn how to interact with lawyers. And we teach them how to build relationships with people. And then we connect them with lawyers on our mobile platform, and they start to interact with them and learn more about the law. So that's why I wanted to come here today and talk to you guys about this, because I think all of it is a very human thing. Networking is all about actually relationship building. I think a lot of people feel like networking has this very sleazy connotation, like you're just trying to get something from somebody or something like that, and people just feel icky about it. So we wanted to, you know, serve up a few scenarios for you, very common scenarios where you'll probably encounter, you know, networking. So we're going to present these scenarios, and during each scenario, Carlos is going to open up a poll about each scenario, and then we'll talk during the scenario about things that we've faced and how we've handled them. And then we'll have a Q&A section at the end where you guys can really ask all of your questions. So Carlos will be collecting all your questions in the chat box, and then we'll be talking about the scenarios. So the first scenario that we want to talk about is job searching. How do you network with people when you're looking for a job, but you're not trying to seem desperate for a job? And then the second scenario will be personal branding and reputation building, which we think is interrelated, but not necessarily the same. And then the last scenario is at professional networking events. How do you network at a large event? And so with that, I want to go ahead and start us off in sharing a little bit more about my experiences in job searching, and then I'll hand it off to Chris and Ola to tell their experiences. So with job searching, for me, I knew in law school, by the time I had gotten into law school and talked to all of these different lawyers that John introduced me to, I knew I wanted to be an intellectual property lawyer. And I also developed an interest while I was in law school in going in-house. So I knew I wasn't going to go the traditional route that a lot of lawyers go, where they go work for a firm and, you know, after 5 to 7 years, maybe they go try something else. I knew I wanted to be in-house, and so I wanted certain job opportunities. And it was easy for me to narrow my search down because I knew what I wanted. But I think a lot of law students go to law school not really understanding what they want. And so they don't really, they kind of get distracted by every shiny object out there and distracted by what all other law students are doing. And they don't take the time for themselves to really figure out what they want. So for me, I think when I was searching for a job, it was easier for me to network with people that I could target because they were in these very targeted career paths that I knew wasn't kind of the normal traditional path. And I wanted to talk to a lot of them, like in-house counsels, about how did you make it into your in-house role. Some of them made it in-house right after law school, which was really rare at the time. And I wanted to see how they did that. So I asked a lot of people for informational interviews for those things. And then that eventually led me to getting an in-house externship. And then that eventually led me to working for my first firm. So even though I didn't go in-house after law school, I got to work with the outside counsel that actually worked for Under Armour, which is where I externed in-house. And so it was still a good chance for me to get to know all of the business side, because I got to stay involved with all the people that I originally talked to. So I think what's really important is first knowing your own objectives, knowing who you are, and getting comfortable with who you are so that you know how to project what you're interested in to other people. So that's the key takeaway that I had when I was trying to hunt for a job is first you need to put in the time to figure out what do you want. And then you can communicate that well to other people to figure out who's going to be the right people for you to network with. I'll hand it off to Chris and Ola now to tell their stories.
Thank you. Oh, we have a poll here.
Yeah, so tell us real quick in the poll, how have you found your past job positions? And during that time, Chris, you can go ahead and share your story, and then we'll share the poll results afterwards.
Excellent, thank you. So I have to admit that when I agreed to be on this webinar for introverts, I think a little bit of stereotype threat like came into my consciousness, because I said, gosh, am I going to just like exemplify what people think introverts are as I talk about how to move through professional networking as an introvert? Am I gonna, the worst stereotypes, I guess, are like, awkward, all this kind of stuff, like don't wanna, come out of your shell, when really, introverts are really just get energy from kind of being a little bit more alone, rather than extroverts who get energy from being out in groups. So, it says nothing about all of your ability to be expert at professional networking. So I'll, just to get back to the question about how job searching went for me. I've been out of law school for 16 years. And looking back on all of the positions that Carlos mentioned in my bio, almost all of them came through networking. Only one of my positions came through a cold application. And, I never really thought of myself that I would ever be able to say that. It was through my networks that I got my professional positions in law, but it was in fact true. And I think it's because I went through the effort of trying to build up my network in, not in any way that, compromises my values, but in a way that is an extension of my values. So those people that I knew within different organizations, in my context has mainly been in the nonprofit sector, where because people knew me, they knew my reputation, they were in some cases willing to put in a good word, or even better, be an internal advocate, or even better, were willing to hire me directly. So you just never know who you meet, who may, end up in a position that will be professionally advantageous to you. So, if you're in law school, start thinking about the network that you're building in law school, and certainly after law school as well. So I would just say my two kind of tips are: one, to in fact know your values, like what type of workplace are you looking to be in? So if it's in, big law, is it the type of firm that values diversity? Is it the type of firm that has a really active pro bono practice? Is it a firm that actually has diverse staff? And also know what your needs are, because if I think this is a nice compliment to what Angie said about knowing what you want, but also knowing what you need in order for you to be successful. What type of environment do you want to be in? And that includes the people. So can you visualize someone there being a mentor or even a sponsor for you? Maybe this is someone who shares your values, in addition to helping be that mentor role that you know that you need. I would say that there are people out there who get it and who get you as a first generation professional, as a person of color, as LGBT person. It may not be obvious at first, but as you're building your network, there are people out there who are like you, who you need to have in your circle, and build your community with those folks. And the second tip I'd have on the job hunting side is to be top of mind for key, well-positioned people. So Angie's one of those people. I see some networking already happening in the chat box, but be top of mind for those people who come across job opportunities so that when they come up, they remember to forward an opportunity to you. Even, and this is especially even if the position hasn't even been publicly announced. If you have that network, then you'll be aware of what's to come and you'll just have that, that leg up. And so, for example, now I'm in a position now where I often am asked about job opportunities. And so if I recently had a conversation with someone or saw them at an event, even a virtual event, I'll be more likely to forward them an announcement. And so, you know, one less, I guess, aggressive way to do it is as you get to know someone and you come across a news article, email it to them. Like, I saw this and I thought of you because I know you're interested in this. And this is a way just to keep showing up in someone's email box so that you're top of mind for them. So I would just give those two bits of advice. Know your values, know your needs, and stay top of mind for folks who are well positioned.
I can go next, unless we want to talk about the poll. But basically,
go ahead and go, Ola, and we can talk about the poll after you're done.
Okay. So as was mentioned before, and also thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. As was mentioned before, I'm still in law school, so I can't talk too much about what the job market is like or job search is like post-law school, but I have done 2 summers and networking played a big role in different ways. I will say also that I've become more introverted as time has gone on. So I think I was a little bit more extroverted when I was younger, but especially with more school, I've kind of retreated into my shell and find especially networking context to be pretty draining when you're trying to meet new people and keep a smile on the whole time. So in both cases, I tend to approach networking as more of like conversational, not necessarily like assuming I'll get something out of it, but at minimum, I've gotten like a great conversation and I've gotten an opportunity to learn from people. And that's pretty important for me because that's what to me motivates even my decision to engage with people is like every conversation is room for learning more and building a bigger, more open mindset. So my first 1L summer, I guess there were some people who came to campus who were doing mock interviews just to, you know, equip 1Ls with some tools with interviewing. And the person I spoke to happened to work at the ACLU of Northern California, and we had a really great conversation. And this was so early on in the year that I definitely had no idea what I was going to do that summer. I knew I was generally interested in public interest work, and civil rights work was obviously appealing to me, but I was also interested in immigration, education, law, and things like that. But because we had such a great conversation, and she really talked up the workplace environment too, that I did apply, and I applied to a couple of other places similar to it. And she remembered me from that earlier conversation months later. And so that's pretty much how I secured my 1L job, which I really appreciated, and also was able to network there as well with attorneys who I didn't necessarily work with. So I would say one tip that is really useful, especially for people who are still in law school, is that during your don't just see networking as part of a job search, but think about it as like a continual practice that, especially when you're doing your summer jobs, it's a really unique opportunity to talk with lawyers and sort of figure out what sort of career paths you might want to do, even talk with lawyers who you're not directly working under, just to think about what their paths are and maybe get connected or just get an idea of how broad and wide-ranging the paths people take to their eventual positions. I found that really useful. My 2L summer was pretty untraditional. I basically knew I wanted to be in Nigeria, and I didn't really care what I was doing. Just personally, I wanted to spend a summer there doing legal work, obviously, but finding the bridge to do. I didn't really have a huge preference on capacity, except the public interest focus, I would say. That ended up being so much harder than I thought it would be. It's a big country, so it was pretty astounding to me how difficult it was to find people who had connections to the country, especially in the legal sector. So I started networking pretty early on. And these were some of the more nerve-wracking experiences for me. I went to this conference at the World Bank. I was the only one, like I went by myself, basically. My friend had suggested it to me. I had no idea, I didn't know who would be there, but it was about global development and human rights. And so I was like, that sounds pretty good to me. And I think I definitely had in my back of my mind, like, I would love to get an internship from this. Anything I'm doing, I had more of a job search mindset to networking in these contexts. And it was definitely nerve wracking because I didn't have anyone to sort of like introduce me to folks. And kind of to what Angie's saying, people can be really pretentious if they don't know who you are. And as a law student, I'm not like impressing anyone. So how I kind of approach those as well, particularly for people who will underestimate you because you're a person of color or you're first gen, I've just found that like those are probably not people I want to connect with anyway, and they're probably not going to be great mentors for me. I think like mentorship is a two-way street, and not just anyone should be like your mentor just because they've reached a certain position. I remember there was one person that I did make some friends throughout the conference, which was really nice. I think the longer you sort of spend at a conference and you bump into people at different panels, you start talking to people. Um, and so some of those folks were encouraging me to talk to someone who was a really big deal at the World Bank. I won't say who. And we had a lot in common, like ethnicity, everything, and like training and stuff. And it was wild. I was so disheartened by like how dismissive she was. And that was pretty disappointing to me too, but it was the type of thing where it's like, well, moving on, there are better mentors elsewhere. I'll just keep searching. So it's not really about me. It's maybe about them and maybe their biases. I went to other events as well, and like there was this Salzburg. If people are interested in international law, I would highly recommend they check out this Salzburg Cutler Fellowship, which is just this, again, sort of conference where people can present work and stuff. Anyway, I talked to people there. I networked all the live long day basically. And what was interesting is that how I ended up getting a position at this like human rights NGO, it wasn't through networking technically. Someone in a network mentioned an NGO, so I applied cold. So what was interesting about networking in my 2L summer was more that I learned so much about the landscape of legal practitioners in Nigeria, international law, and things like that. It was just like a really valuable learning experience, so I could be more tailored in my search later on, even though it wasn't necessarily what was the result of it didn't necessarily lead to a job or an internship. So I think it's important to think about networking in a lot of ways, like both as a job search, but also educational as well. Also a chance to build relationships, and not to be too disappointed if it doesn't like narrowly fit the job search category.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of those things. I thought that was an amazing story, Ola. I mean, I can't imagine how intimidating it can be to go to something as large as a conference at the World Bank. But, you know, I think the one thing that I always tell my mentees is that all you need really is one person to really care about you, who's willing to stick their neck out for you and maybe give you an opportunity here and there. Like, it doesn't matter if you talk to 50 people who all turn you down. You know, if you can find that one person, then that's all you really need. And with me, it took me 50 cold calls to get to one lawyer who cared about me, but I struck gold with him. I mean, he was a great mentor, and he mentored me, you know, all throughout my life, and we still talk. And, you know, and I think that it's really important to note, like, once you have that one person who cares about you, that is worth all the 50 people who told you no. You know, you're going to remember, you know, that relationship and value that relationship so much. But absolutely, you should not think about networking only when you need a job, because, you know, people don't want to just hear from you only when you need a job. And I think that what Chris was saying is, you know, staying top of mind, like that involves you networking all the time, not just when you need a job. So but I thought the poll results were interesting because most of you said that you did get a job through networking. So I think we all know how important it is to keep doing it, and it's kind of a lifelong thing. So I'd love to just, you know, keep talking about these different scenarios and see if we can share some more insights with you all. So I want to move into our next scenario, which is personal branding and reputation building. So I think that, you know, people think about personal branding a lot and then think of reputation building as a little bit of a separate thing. You know, personal branding is kind of what you project to the world as you want the world to see, you know, about you. But reputation building is more what you do on a consistent basis that creates that perception about you, right? So, so I'll hand it over to Chris to share his experiences about personal branding and reputation building with you.
Sure, thank you. So I want to hone in a little bit more on the reputation side. And that adage that your reputation precedes you, I think is so true in law and in any professional setting, that the moment your name is mentioned, it conjures an image of uh, within the person about who you are before you even meet them. And so it's really important for you to think about how you're building your reputation now. One tip I'd recommend is actually asking someone else whose opinion you really respect what you think your reputation is, so that you can actually hear it from someone else, because your self-concept is sometimes very different from how others actually perceive you. And my birthday was, just a personal story, my birthday was last week, and a gift that I got was a tribute video, which is everyone contributes like a short little snippet, they record it, and then this website collates it all. And I was just so surprised by, honestly, I was surprised by what everyone had said, because they said that I was very calm and I saw the bright side of things. This is just on a personal level. And, just like thinking through what life is like these days, I don't feel very calm, and sometimes I don't really focus on the bright things. But that was just super interesting to hear that that's what I was projecting. But in a professional context, I did the same thing, and I asked someone else what they thought about my reputation. And they said, gets things done, you're very nice, and I think you're a little too nice. And that was very eye-opening, because I think they saw that maybe getting in the way of my professional development. And so it was just really helpful. It wasn't a mentor, it was just a peer, someone that I had worked with who worked in a different organization. And that was very, I never forgot it, because, it just made me think like, okay, if I'm going to accomplish what I want to accomplish, do I need to take the nice edge off and, be more focused on certain other aspects of how to get things done? I mean, I will admit that my approach is to go on the charm offensive. That's how I approach things generally. And then sometimes if it doesn't work, then I go into the toolbox, but that's how I choose to move forward. So all of this to say that what you don't want to hear when you're asking someone what you think your reputation is, you don't want to hear not easy to work with. You don't want to hear not a team player. You don't want that reputation. What you do want to hear someone say about you is they go above and beyond what's expected. They're hardworking. So let me put this another way. If you had two equally qualified people that you had to choose to work with, but one person had a good reputation and another didn't, who would you choose? Obviously the person with a good reputation. So what are some ways that you can go about building a good reputation? So for me, what I did very early on in my career was I volunteered. And I volunteered on nonprofit board of directors. I volunteered in affinity groups. So if you have an affinity group, whether it's like a law student organization or within your company or your law firm, join that group. Have the opportunity to demonstrate leadership. Get involved in a bar organization, whether a bar organization of color, a practice area bar org, or a mainstream bar organization, based on geography. But get involved, because it's a chance for you to build your reputation, and it's also a leadership opportunity for you. And so if other people see you leading, then that's the reputation that you start to build within your professional network. So the second thing I just say around building your reputation is to, maintain a social media presence, but keep it positive. Know that not only are your friends looking, but possible employers may be looking. So, if your settings are completely public, just keep that in mind in terms of how you're showing up, because it does feed into your personal brand and reputation.
So that's actually a great segue into what I was going to talk about, because I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how I've been networking on LinkedIn, and how I was using LinkedIn pre-pandemic and then post-pandemic. So pre-pandemic, I used LinkedIn for this in the same way for practically my entire legal career, and even mostly into my transition to being an entrepreneur. And that was, I use it as a glorified resume. I just had, all the things on my profile, and I wasn't really engaging with people. I wasn't driving conversations on LinkedIn. I wasn't really doing any of that. I just had a profile on there, and I don't even think I had an about section until maybe 7 months ago. So it literally just had all my work experience on there, and you couldn't really tell what my reputation was unless you really had heard from other people what it was. And so if you were just looking at me on LinkedIn and you were probably not in my immediate circle, or you weren't located in Dallas, Texas, or you didn't know somebody who knew me, then it was really hard to know what my reputation was or what I stood for. So I think personal branding is really communicating to people what you stand for. I think we talk a lot about authenticity, whether you're coming off as authentic. And authenticity, like an inherent part about authenticity, is showing people whether or not your actions are congruent with your beliefs and desires. So people need to know what your beliefs and your desires are in order to compare and judge whether or not your actions actually comport with those things. So personal branding, you should be communicating to people what are your beliefs and how do you go about your life in a way that comports with these beliefs. So without those dimensions, it just comes off really flat. So how many of you have seen, LinkedIn profiles where people literally just say, attorney at XYZ law firm, and like there's no about section, nothing about them. So like you're looking at it and you're like, okay, so you're an attorney at a law firm. There's millions of attorneys at a law firm, and I don't know really anything else about you. So you need to not just talk about what you do, which is attorney at XYZ law firm, but how you do it and why you do it. I'm an intellectual property attorney because I love helping small businesses and entrepreneurs like myself solve their business problems, those types of things. That's what shows people who you are, why you do it, and why you care about it. And why should they care about you? People are not going to care about you on a deeper level until they know what you stand for, until they know your values, your beliefs. And are those going to be polarizing? Absolutely. Like that, if you have certain values and beliefs that you stand for, that's not going to satisfy everybody. And that's totally okay. I think the main thing is owning what those beliefs and those values are. The worst thing that I think somebody could say when, like, if somebody asks them, hey, what's Angie's reputation? Is if they say, I don't really know. I don't know what she stands for. I have no idea what she stands for. Like, that's the worst thing that they could say about me. If they have a negative opinion about me, that's totally fine with me, as long as they have an opinion, as long as they know who I am and what I stand for, because I don't want to please everybody out there. You're just not going to please everybody out there. So you need to show them what are your beliefs, what do you stand for, and the people that have those values will want to mentor you more. The people who share your values will want to have you as part of their organizations. You will be able to choose organizations better because you will be able to figure out whether your values align with the organization's values. And same thing when I'm looking for an organization that I want to work for. I don't want to work for an organization that's lukewarm on things, or that they don't know who they are as an organization, that they don't project what their values are or what they believe in. I do want to work for organizations that do all those things, that show me what they believe in, and then they put their money where their mouth is. So I think that it's important that you know what your own values are, you project what those things are, and then it will help you align yourself better with the people that you want to do business with the people that you want to belong to. So those are all important pieces. And I just think it's important to show, all these different sides of you, because you don't want to just come off as, the more that you just talk about what you do, the less people will care. The more that you talk about how and why you do it, the more people will care. So, and with that, I think we want to move into our very last scenario, which is professional networking events. And how do you handle it when you're out there at events like this one, if you're doing an online event versus if you're doing a live event? So, so I want to go ahead and hand it over to Chris to talk about his or actually, I'm sorry, I'll hand it over to Ola to talk about her experiences in professional networking.
Yeah, so some of the experiences I would say more recent have been the ones that I was somewhat alluding to in my earlier story about the job search. So that World Bank conference was really intimidating in terms of networking. And like I said, I try to go about it in a conversational way. And I guess specific tips that I really try to look or try to abide by are finding people whose work is really interesting to me, or finding people who are even in a field that I'm really interested in and just casually talking. And then sometimes like really biting the bullet and just approaching someone who maybe is standing off to themselves so they look a little bit less intimidating, and being like, what do you do? What brought you to that? And just seeing it as like a life story that could be really interesting to learn from. And if it intersects, that's awesome. And if it doesn't, well, I still had a great conversation anyway. Um, I would say at the other conference that I was describing that was maybe more focused on the work people were presenting, it was a lot easier because I had heard from so many different law students and professors about the work they were doing. And so it was so much easier for me to just ask questions about international law and learn more that way. But I do tend to approach networking in more of like a conversational, educational dialogue, and then maybe veering more towards into what's the work that you're doing and how did you get involved in that. I just think organic conversations are what are remembered best. I do remember one time that I went to this sort of like firm recruiting event at my law school. There was like free food being offered, so that was a big incentive for me. And but I knew nothing about firms, so I did try to talk to folks that way as well. And that was helpful for me because I guess I had more of a targeted question, which was like, what are your pro bono practices? And trying to understand how much they valued pro bono and how they even discussed it was helpful for me because I really didn't have anything else that I could discuss with them. So just trying to find points of connections was really important for me as well. I haven't done any virtual networking events, so I would love to hear more from other folks about how they're navigating that.
Yeah, so one of the things I think is really unique about virtual events is that you tend to have more of an equal voice in a virtual event, which I think is interesting because it's an inherent part of the technology, like whether it's Zoom or WebEx or whatever, that whoever's speaking, it automatically switches to that person and you take up like the whole screen unless you're in gallery view, right? So it's a little harder for people to talk over you. So I actually think online networking is actually a really good medium for a lot of introverts and people who are normally really shy, because there are things about it that make you have kind of more equal footing. So for example, like anybody who chimes in on the chat box, just inherently the way that the chat box works is all of you have the same font, all of you have the same look, all of you have the same style. So like you don't look as much of an outsider as like if you're in a live networking event. Like some of the things that I've noticed about online networking is, at least if you're in a Zoom meeting where you can see everybody on gallery view, like it equally gives everybody the same size box. It's not like the loudest person in the room wins, you know, like it's like you equally all get a voice. And it's also a great tool to use the feedback buttons, to use all of the you know, Q&A, the polling. All of these tools allow people who normally might shy away from expressing themselves verbally to communicating in a written medium. And I think that it allows you to communicate your voice better. The other thing is on social media, like if you communicate on social media, it's not an instant exchange generally. You know, it's not like a live networking setting where like so many people are in the room and sometimes the extroverts, we suck out all the air. You know, if you're on social media, like you're seeing all these people interact, but it's kind of on equal footing. Again, you get the same amount of space, you get the same amount of characters, you get the same amount of font and size and type. And so you can communicate in a richer way, I think, if you're used to being more introverted and you like expressing yourself through a written medium. Social media and online networking events are really great ways to do that. So I think, you know, you can also use, the other nice thing about using the chat box is if somebody else is talking, you can use the chat box to talk against them. So, you know, so in a way you're getting to be heard even when someone else is talking. So
Actually, can I
I
say
think it's
one
kind
quick
of,
thing? Oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to jump off of something you said.
Yeah, go ahead.
That specifically for introverts as well, I've noticed people love talking about themselves. So sometimes even just asking a question or two can really set someone off to talk for a long time where you don't have to say much. And even though you feel like you didn't say much and you're too introverted, you can come off a lot better than someone who's extroverted and talked about themselves the whole time and took up a lot of space in the conversation. So I actually think that's a huge asset and something I do a lot in these like big networking events.
Totally. So, so I think we wanted to go ahead and get into the Q&A portion so we can get to all these questions. I know we have a ton of them. So Carlos, you want to kick us off?
So thank you all for sharing your experiences. The chat box and the Q&A box have been very active. And it looks like we actually do have a lot of first-gen people in the room. So the first question for all of you is, how did you have the support of your parents and family in general? How do you navigate that?
Ola, Chris, you want to take it first?
I think I definitely have the support, I would say. Like, that is not a question. I think in terms of being specific about what I want to do and stuff, there's, I think, the concern about we're first gen, we like don't have maybe family connection or a lot of connections here in this country. And so how do I build those in a way that like I will be able to support myself and people who come after me? I think that's can be a tension, particularly for maybe different jobs I've been interested in, but I feel pretty supported.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in. I think my parents are pretty supportive given where I am now. I think it was a little bit hard at the beginning to convince them that going into law was the right thing. Even though my brother is a lawyer, they still didn't think it was the right thing for me to do. And maybe I subconsciously, was getting some lessons from my older brother. But it took a bit of education, especially because I wanted to do public interest and I didn't work in a big law firm where, I'm still paying off my loan 16 years later. And that's the choice that I decided to make in order that I could feel like I can show up for work and feel like I'm living my values every day. And that was really important to me. And when I explained that, to my family, how can they argue with that? So that was my journey.
Yeah, my parents kind of went back and forth. So they're engineers. They really wanted me to be a good little engineer, and I did not want to be an engineer. I chose advertising at first, which was way scary for them. They were really not on board with that. Then once I chose law school, I mean, it was one of those, I guess, professions that seemed very prestigious, but they were still very worried because they didn't have any connections in that area, and they just felt like they really couldn't help me with it because being immigrants, they didn't know anything about the US legal system. I mean, they were pretty terrified, actually. And then once I found my way, got my first job, was making pretty good money for a little while, they were on board. And then I decided to be an entrepreneur. So I just keep throwing things at them and seeing what happens. But yeah, no, I mean, I think they're pretty on board now with what I'm doing because they know that I'm helping other people. But I think it's much scarier for them. Both of them are of the generation that they go to work every day to earn a paycheck, and they just do it steadily to make sure they keep earning that paycheck. And I've never been that kind of person. I wanted to own my own business. I wanted to have all the risks that go along with that. And so I think it's a little bit scary for them. But again, you got to be true to yourself. Like, whether your parents support you or not, like, I think all they want for you is what most parents want for you, is for you to be safe, happy, healthy, financially successful. And so as long as you keep moving towards your own goals and you're doing those things, then I think they'll jump on board, most of them.
The other question, and I think this one, Chris, you might be particularly well suited to answering, but you talked a lot about, going outside of your job to network, volunteering and things like that. So how do you go about finding those types of, for instance, board positions on nonprofits? This person wants to know, I've heard the way to do that is through networking. I'm sure there are more boards that I am aware of. Should I look up, see who's on the board, on those boards, and ask them if there are positions? and ask them basically how they got there.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think most nonprofits don't advertise that they are looking for board members. I mean, some do, but most don't, I would say. And so if there's an organization out there that you really believe in, and maybe it's like an outlet for you to do the type of work that you want to do that you can't do in your day job. And so um, rounding out your professional experience and really living into your values through volunteering on a board, that's one way that you can do it. Calling up or emailing the executive director and just saying, I'm interested in learning about how to join your board of directors. Can you point me to your nominations committee or explain to me what the process is? What are you looking for in board members? An informational interview with the board chair or the nominations committee. I think for that, just being pretty direct, because I will say it's really exciting when someone says that they want to join your board. I mean, I have done the work of asking people to join my board, but just this year, someone, who's on our news brief distribution list wrote back to the email that it came from and said, I want to join your board. I see what you're doing. And when I saw that, I was like, yes, let's talk. So I think being super direct on this one really makes sense. And, just one tip on nonprofit board service is being really clear about what you want to bring to the organization, because many nonprofits really want people with legal backgrounds on their board. So if that's the role you want to play, do that, especially if it's not a legal organization. But if it is a legal organization, what do you want to accomplish there? Is it and what skills do you want to grow? Board service is a great way to do that.
Thank you. Angie and Ola, do you have any tips for either board service while you're on our board? So maybe you can speak to this. Or just in general, how to build your reputation up through those types of volunteer activities.
Well, this is the first board I've really been a part of, so I can only speak about this one. But it's definitely, again, been a huge privilege to meet people who are more senior in the field and learn about, again, their paths that they took to where they are, and maybe get a little informal mentorship. I also feel really grateful because I was a scholarship recipient from the Change Lawyers. So I feel really lucky to just be part of the process of selecting new recipients and just making sure that, and helping the Change Lawyers organization formulate their policy goals. I would say the other volunteering that I do beyond board service is more political and canvassing for certain candidates and things like that, and working on campaigns. And I think I actually find that really useful. Maybe I don't know how it fits necessarily professionally, but at least being just sort of a civically engaged in the sort of locality that I'm in, and getting more connected to people who are in my neighborhood or people who are fighting for certain values is really important to me as well. Yeah, I would say that.
And just in full disclosure, my company is actually a for-profit organization. We aren't a nonprofit, so I don't serve on any nonprofit boards. But I think in the same vein, it's totally fine for you to be just active and engaged in any organization that you're a part of and really take a leadership role. And I think that you could get a lot of opportunities from just taking leadership roles in, professional organizations, bar associations, and you can always also serve on advisory boards for-profit entities. I mean, many of us are doing things that do create a social impact. Many companies now want to create social change, even if they're making a profit. And so I think if you want to be a part of that, you can easily reach out to them as well and say, I'm interested in your mission. I like what you do. And I'd love to learn more about, what it takes to be on your advisory board. Especially startups, we're always looking for people to join advisory boards who can provide expertise in different areas. So consider that option as well.
And I think we're almost out of time, so I just want to sort of condense a lot of the questions into one final one. A lot of people have general advice or are seeking general advice on how do you take care of yourself? How do you hone your skills? How do you develop these habits and routines to make this easier for you. So if each of you can leave everyone in the room with sort of like one tip about how you, like the one thing that has helped you navigate networking the best.
Sure. I'll go ahead and go first. So for me, I find lots of people to model myself off of. You know, I think especially when you're the youngest person, or you feel like an outsider, or you don't feel like you know very much about the organization that you've just gotten involved in, you know, find the leaders in the organization who you might want to model yourself off of. Or even if you find people who you're like, they're terrible leaders, then you know what you don't want to model yourself off of. But I think when I first dive into a new organization or a new company or any new situation, you know, you do a little bit of observing first of all to figure out what's the lay of the land. Then you try to find some leaders and people who may mentor you, and you can own your outsider, own being an outsider. Like, go in and say, I'm brand new to this organization. I'm looking for ways to get involved and contribute meaningfully, but I'm just trying to get to know, like, what are the things that I can get involved in? What are the opportunities of ways that I can help? And people are usually super receptive to that. There's almost always something that you can do to help. If you go into it acting like a know-it-all, even when you don't know anything, that's when you're going to rub people the wrong way. So own your outsider status and go in there and use that to your advantage.
You want to go ahead, Ola?
I would say this is both to the point of like what's helpful with networking, and then also how do we take care of ourselves. I would say what I've said before, I really try to look for things that I might have in common with the person. I don't try to have too rigid of like an end goal with any conversation or networking experience, just because I believe things happen for a reason too. And I might not necessarily know exactly why something works out, or I won't always, I like to be flexible, I guess, to how life turns out for me. But I think going and treating every dialogue as like a space for learning more about maybe what you're professionally interested in, or just about another person, means that there's like no experience that's wasted. So that's very useful for me. And I would say in terms of just taking care of mental health as well, not feeling like I need to be networking all the time as well. This is kind of even earlier to your point about personal branding. There was some conversations about how to engage with that online too. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I find myself to be really political and have been trying to figure out how does that fit in with my professional identity. And so in a lot of ways, whether it's networking or whether it's job searching or branding, not feeling like you need to be on and doing it all the time, like giving space to be yourself and be true to yourself, and also know that that will be consistent to whatever your professional identity is, I think is important. And that helps, at least with me, for my mental health.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add is thinking about networking, not just from what the point of view of what you can gain from it, but what you can give also. So, you know, I'm a firm believer in pay it forward. So if you can help someone else out who is looking for something, that's great. That's how part of how networking happens, is that you help other people too. And that certainly helps from a mental health point of view. Just like small bits of like connections that you can help make for other people, yeah, that makes me feel good that I'm able to do that. So I guess just pay it forward. And you know, I believe in karma. I think if you put out good stuff's going to come back to you. So I'll just leave it at that.
All right. Well, thank you all for this advice. I know I've learned so much today. And thank you to everyone in the audience. This conversation will be made available on YouTube in a few days. And we'll also be sharing a little tip sheet with everyone. So look out for that in your inboxes. And then I just want to give everyone a heads up that next Tuesday, August 11th at noon, Change Lawyers is going to be hosting another webinar. This one is going to be on trans and queer liberation in 2020. So what are the issues affecting the trans and queer community? We just had a big Supreme Court decision on employment discrimination, but what does that mean practically moving forward? And we're going to have lawyers working on these issues, talking about this as well as activists. And there were a lot of questions about mental health. So keep a lookout on our Eventbrite. In September, on September 9th at noon, we're going to be having a self-care and healing 101 workshop. that's going to be led by a somatics practitioner, particularly about how to take care of your mental health when the world is very stressful and your job is very stressful, something that I think a lot of lawyers and law students can relate to. So check us out, connect with us on LinkedIn. That's where we share a lot of this stuff. And you can also find all of our events on Eventbrite. Thank you once again to Angie, to Chris, and to Ola for being part of this. And take care, everyone.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Bye all.